Hi, everyone. This is Christian-apologists.com with S.J. Thomason, where truth matters. Right now, we're going to listen to a video with Dominic Sandbrook there on the right and Tom Holland on the left. They're going to answer some questions about Martin Luther. What was his impact on the world? He was around the 16th century. He was at the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, 1517. He presented his 95 Thesis and really changed the fabric of Europe. So let's hear what Dominic asked Tom about this.
In your notes, you've said the world will be incalculably different, and you use these three isms: atheism, secularism, individualism. So the idea of thinking for yourself, not being told, that your personal truth, your conscience. Atheism, because he's thinking. How does he anticipate atheism?
Because his great argument is that sola scriptura. If it's not in the Bible, it get rid of it. And so it expressive of a kind of profound skepticism towards the inheritance of a religious tradition. So it gets rid of all kinds of dogmas from the medieval church, but the logical implication as well. And essentially that is the kind of the endpoint that Protestant countries can arrive at. And the whole process that gets initiated with Karlstadt and then with Munster and so on, that you overthrow traditional expressions of piety in the form of icons and so on, that these are idols, that they have to be toppled, all superstition. Again, you get rid of all that, you end up getting rid of everything. The process of Reformation, I think, logically ends with atheism, which is why so many prominent atheists and humanists sound so Protestant. They are evangelical. Get rid of it, and you will gain enlightenment. You will gain the truth. You will feel in your heart that you're a better person. I mean, this is pure Luther, but without God. And secularism, for the reasons that we were talking about earlier, the idea that it refines the idea of what religion is and counterpoints it to something called the secular. And again, I mean, Luther would have been appalled to imagine that he was, had a role to play in the emergence of any of those trends. But it doesn't stop him from.
So let's point out what is going on here. So how is Luther similar to that? So in the Catholic Church, one major idea is that there's the papacy. Jesus said to Peter, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it." And as you know, Peter was martyred over there at St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, and upon that rock to build the church. That's where the Roman Catholic Church is based. And so you can see where there's an apostolic succession, a succession of popes from Pope Peter. That's also been documented by the early church fathers such as Irenaeus and Ignatius of Antioch. But I digress. So we have this foundation of the Catholic Church and the belief that there's a hierarchy and a respect for the Pope. The Pope is another word for Papa, Papa being the first bishop of Rome, and that's, of course, St. Peter. And so now we go back to what Tom is saying, and he's talking about what happened in the 16th century. So in the 16th century, we had this idea that you could have your own personal relationship with Jesus, kind of like Depeche Mode, my own personal Jesus. And so we have this very individualistic idea that you can plant your own church. You don't need to have any sort of authority structure like the Catholic Church. You can sort of kick rid of that, plant your own church. It doesn't have to be this gigantic, ornate, very expensive church. That speaks to what was said in the Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism a long time ago by Max Weber at the turn of the last century. He talked about the beauty of Protestantism and the way that it ushered in capitalism and ushered in the idea of thrift and prosperity and making money. And it kind of went against what the Catholic Church had always stood for, with the meek will inherit the world, as far as how the congregation was taught, versus also the idea of building a lot, putting a lot into the church to give awe to God. And so the Catholic Church is structured a little differently. Now, how does this relate to atheism? Well, atheists also reject an authority. Of course, the authority is not the authority of the church. Surely they reject that. But they further reject the authority of God the Father. A lot of them possibly maybe didn't get along with their own father. And so they look into heaven and say, well, how could I possibly worship another father when my own father wasn't the most ideal father or mother? And so you have that idea. Of course, I'm not saying that that's all atheists or even representative of atheists, but I'm saying it's one idea with rejecting an authority. The idea of being subservient to an authority also is something that some atheists find very displeasing. And so, as Tom Holland has pointed out, this whole Protestant Reformation could have ushered in what we saw in the German universities in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, with a rejection of different parts of the Bible. And so, as you know, when Luther came about, there were 73 books of the Bible. Those were the ones affirmed in the Catholic canons, also in the councils, like the Council of Rome, Council of Hippo, and also other local councils that occurred in the 4th and 5th century. And we had these 73 books in the Bible. Also, these same books were in the earliest codices, like Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, as pointed out by others like William Albrecht. So we had these 73 books in there. They were also, of course, in the Septuagint, which is what Jesus was referencing and what other early apostles were referencing in the New Testament. They reference the Septuagint, which, of course, also contained the 73 books. So did the King James Version of 1611. But what happened was those books contained different ideas that went against what Luther was teaching. For example, the book of Second Maccabees made it pretty crystal clear that there's purgatory, and you can pray for the dead. You can pray for people who are in that intermediate state between heaven and hell, which would be purgatory, where you're cleansed of your sins. And so Maccabees made that clear. So Luther thought that Maccabees should be diminished. And later on, other Protestants pulled those books out, and that's why Protestants have 66 books in the Bible. But this idea of kind of tearing apart the Bible, questioning whether Acts 8:37 should be around, or the longer ending of Mark, or if we should have the story of the woman adulterer that Jesus forgave. All these stories are part of what they call textual criticism, and it's something that has arisen through Protestantism, and it's questioning the Bible, questioning the structure, questioning where we came about, all of these ideas. And it's one of those things. Now, according to some, they claim that Protestantism will diminish at some point. You'll have its logical outcome of atheism, and then everybody will revert back to the original hierarchy and tradition of the Catholic Church. But that stands to be questioned or debated. We also have different authors, like, for example, Inglehart was somebody who came out with the World Value Surveys, where they've had waves of data collection starting in 1981. They distinguish people by whether or not they were adherent to tradition and religion versus secular rationalism, they called it, or modernism, scientism, that kind of thing. And then there was another distinction of survival versus self-expression. And in those views, you can see where the most self-expressive, highly secular groups happen to be in Protestant Europe. And so a lot of the Protestant countries tend to embrace that. And as we've seen an increase in atheism in these countries. Now, some have saying there's a Christian revival, people like Justin Brierley, and I'd love to see that, but we haven't seen it quite yet. And so I hope you enjoy this video, just short, quick, talking about some thoughts on the Reformation, how that's led to some of the issues we have today and some of the culture wars today. And if you like this kind of content, please like, subscribe, and do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Thank you.